What happened to the Nephilim and the giants of the Bible? The Bible speaks of giants, being so large and powerful they terrified entire nations. Who were they? Where did they come from? What happened to them? And why are they barely ever talked about in church today? From ancient warriors like Goliath to mysterious beings called the Nephilim, this video explores one of the Bible's most fascinating and controversial topics, the giants of the Bible. You're about to discover a hidden world that's been buried for centuries. The biblical giants aren't just tall people or legendary figures. They have a deep theological and symbolic significance. Remember, when we talk about giants in the Bible, we're not just using the word loosely. The original Hebrew terms like Nephilim, Rephaim, Anakim, Emim, and Gibborim all point to powerful giant beings. The Greek translation, the Septuagint, calls them gigantes, which is where we get the word giants. But that term might not mean what you think. It's not just about size, it's also about power, fear, and spiritual significance. The scope of this video goes beyond the Bible. To really understand these beings, we'll explore not only the Bible, but also other ancient texts that shed light on this mystery. We'll look into Genesis, Deuteronomy, Numbers, as well as apocryphal books like Enoch and Jubilees. These writings give context and connect the biblical giants to other ancient myths and beliefs. We'll even touch on Mesopotamian legends like Gilgamesh to see how giants were viewed across cultures. This isn't just a Bible study, it's a journey through ancient history and spiritual warfare. Please, watch to the end. Before we go deeper, please like this video and hit that subscribe button. We're on a mission to reach 100,000 subscribers this year, and with your help, we can do it. Now let's consider 5 groups of those giants. 1. Nephilim. The Nephilim are perhaps the most mysterious of them all. They appear first in Genesis 6, 1:4, right before the flood. Some believe they were the offspring of fallen angels, called the sons of God, and human women. The word Nephilim can mean fallen ones, but it might also mean those who cause others to fall. Whether seen as giants or spiritual corruptors, they were seen as a major reason for God's judgment on the world. 2. Rephaim. The Rephaim were another group of ancient giants mentioned in places like Deuteronomy and Isaiah. Interestingly, this word is also used to describe the spirits of the dead, especially those in the underworld. This gives them a ghostly, even demonic association. King Og of Bashan is called the last of the Rephaim, and his bed was over 13 feet long. These weren't just stories, they were warnings. 3. Anakim. The Anakim were a race of giants descended from Anak, known for their intimidating size and strength, so much so that Israelite spies claimed, "We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes." Numbers 13:33. Possibly connected to the Nephilim or Rephaim, they were feared inhabitants of Canaan with strongholds like Hebron and ties to the Philistines, perhaps even explaining Goliath's origins. Though powerful, the Anakim were nearly wiped out during Joshua's conquest, with survivors only in cities like Gaza and Gath, where remnants like Goliath may have lived before their final disappearance. 4. Emim. The Emim, meaning terrors or dreaded ones, were a race of giants who inhabited the land of Moab before being displaced by the Moabites. Deuteronomy 2:10-11. Like the Anakim, they were considered Rephaim, a broader category of ancient giants, and were described as great, numerous, and tall as the Anakim. When the Moabites conquered their territory, later called Moab, the Emim were either wiped out, assimilated, or fled. The Bible mentions them only briefly, suggesting they faded into obscurity, unlike the Anakim who clashed directly with Israel. 5. Gibborim. In Genesis 6:4, we also read about the Gibborim, described as mighty men of old, men of renown. Some scholars think they were different from the Nephilim, possibly heroic warriors or ancient kings. Others believe they were linked to the same fallen bloodline. The term Gibborim is used throughout the Bible to describe great warriors, including David's mighty men. But in this context, their greatness seems to come with a dark twist. Wait a minute. What if the giants weren't just ancient enemies, but part of a cosmic battle between heaven and earth? What if these stories are actually clues about spiritual warfare and unseen realms? Stay with us, because up next we're diving into the lost books, hidden scrolls, and strange legends that bring the giants back into focus. Now let's analyze biblical appearances of the giants. Genesis 6:1-4 mention the Nephilim and the sons of God. This passage raises some of the most controversial questions in Scripture. Who were the sons of God? Were they angels or just human rulers taking many wives? And did their union with women really result in a race of giants? The Bible doesn't go into detail, which has led to centuries of debate. What's clear is that this story marks a turning point in human corruption, just before the Great Flood. They could not have been angels, as angels cannot procreate with humans. Many believe that the sons of God refers to the descendants of Seth, who replaced Abel, while the daughters of men refers to the descendants of Cain, known for their wickedness. Numbers 13:32-33 also talk about the giants in Canaan. When Israelite spies entered Canaan, they returned with a chilling report. We saw the Nephilim there. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes. This sounds like more than just a tall tale. It was a description of overwhelming fear. Were the spies exaggerating, or were these really the descendants of ancient giants? Either way, it caused the people to panic and doubt God's promises. That fear delayed their entrance into the Promised Land for 40 years. In Deuteronomy and Joshua, we also find the Anakim and Rephaim. Og of Bashan is described as the last of the Rephaim, and the size of his bed is specifically recorded to prove his legendary stature. This wasn't just Og of Bashan. It was recorded history to show the power of God over enemies that seemed unbeatable. The Israelites were told not to fear them, even though they were physically and militarily intimidating. These conquest narratives used the giants as symbols of trials that must be overcome through faith. God's power was always greater than the giants they faced. And finally, the most famous biblical giant, Goliath of Gath, according to 1 Samuel 17. Goliath is the most famous giant in the Bible. Standing over 9 feet tall, he was a warrior who terrified Israel's army until a young shepherd named David stepped forward. David's victory wasn't just a military win, it was deeply symbolic. Goliath was possibly descended from the Rephaim or Anakim, continuing the ancient enemy bloodline. David's triumph showed that no giant, physical or spiritual, is too big when God is on your side. Moving beyond the Bible, we turn to 4 other ancient texts and traditions. First, the Book of Enoch, 1 Enoch. Let's examine how the Book of Enoch shed more light on these mysterious beings. In 1 Enoch, we get a dramatic expansion of Genesis 6. The Watchers are fallen angels who mate with women and create a race of giants who corrupt the earth. These giants teach forbidden knowledge and spread violence, leading to the flood. The book explains that these giants became evil spirits after they died, haunting the world. While not included in the Bible, 1 Enoch was influential in early Christian and Jewish thought. Second, Jubilees and other pseudepigrapha. Other ancient texts like Jubilees tell similar stories about giants being part of a corrupt, hybrid race. These beings were destroyed in the flood as part of God's judgment. The giants are not only a symbol of sin, but are also used to explain the origin of demons. These stories were very popular among the Dead Sea Scrolls community. They offer a behind-the-scenes view of how ancient people understood spiritual warfare. Third, Dead Sea Scrolls. Several Dead Sea Scrolls mention the Nephilim, Watchers, and related themes. These texts show that the topic of giants was not just myth, it was central to their apocalyptic worldview. For them, giants were connected to spiritual rebellion and the corruption of God's creation. They believed that the return of these ancient beings would signal the end times. These scrolls provide insight into how deeply these ideas were embedded in Jewish theology. And fourth, ancient Near Eastern parallels. The Bible isn't the only ancient text to mention giants. Stories like the Epic of Gilgamesh speak of powerful semi-divine beings with great strength. Similar myths appear in Egyptian and Ugaritic stories. This doesn't weaken the Bible. It shows that the idea of giants was part of a broader cultural memory. The Bible uses that language to show how God's truth stood above the myths of the nations. Now let's explore contemporary scholarly perspectives. Today's scholars continue to debate the meaning and purpose of giants in the Bible. The historical critical approach looks at the Bible as a collection of sources from different time periods and writers. Some scholars believe stories about giants came from ancient oral traditions meant to explain the chaos and evil of early humanity. The JEDP theory, for instance, examines how the Torah was compiled and how different parts of Genesis might reflect different authors' views on giants. This approach helps us understand the Bible not just as a spiritual text, but as a product of its time and culture. Another method is the literary and canonical reading of Scripture, which looks at how stories of giants fit within the entire Bible. Instead of focusing on whether giants were physically real, this method asks how the stories function in the grand narrative. For example, the defeat of Goliath becomes more than just a story. It represents God's triumph over human pride and worldly power. Giants are used as symbols of massive problems that seem impossible to overcome without God's help. This approach helps believers today see the relevance of these ancient stories in their own struggles. Finally, scholars are exploring how the intertestamental period and apocalyptic worldviews influence New Testament ideas. Books like Enoch and the teachings about fallen angels gave early Christians a framework for understanding demons, spiritual warfare, and even the mission of Jesus. This helps explain why New Testament writers like Peter and Jude refer back to the story of the Nephilim. Giants, in this view, aren't just about ancient history. They're part of a spiritual battle that continues into the New Covenant. This deeper understanding connects ancient giants with themes of redemption, evil, and divine victory. So what have we learned about giants in the Bible? They're not just towering figures of legend. They're powerful symbols with deep theological meaning. Whether we look at the Nephilim, Rephaim, or Goliath, each giant represents humanity's deepest fears and God's greatest triumphs. Through these stories, we see God's power overcoming the seemingly impossible and protecting His people. Giants become more than characters. They become lessons in faith, courage, and trust. In biblical theology, giants mark the line between the human and the divine, the natural and the supernatural. Their presence reminds us that God often calls His people to face overwhelming odds, but each defeat of a giant also points to God's supreme power to bring victory and order out of chaos. From the flood to the conquest of Canaan to David's slingshot, every moment is packed with meaning. These giants may have fallen, but their stories stand tall in Scripture. For those interested in digging even deeper, the study of giants opens up paths into ancient mythologies, church history, spiritual symbolism, and even popular culture. How have these stories shaped how we imagine good versus evil? What can we learn from how early Christians and Jews interpreted them? And what do these stories say about our own giants today, whether spiritual, emotional, or societal? There's so much more to explore. The journey has just begun. If you made it this far, thank you. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to support this channel. We're on a mission to reach 100,000 subscribers this year, and your support means everything. See you in the next deep dive into the mysteries of Scripture.